good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Christelle Rinn, and I'm the COO here at HRLocker. Today, I'm delighted to have Derek McKay with us from Adair HRM. Excuse me. Where we're going to be talking about, I suppose, the HR trends for 2023, different things that are happening in the environment, things we need to be aware of, and I suppose just a bit of a temperature check of where things are at. So thanks so much for being with us today, Derek. We're looking forward to...
Good morning, how are you?
Giving us your wisdom today.
Well, let's not oversell it early on, Christelle.
As always, we have our questions and answers section where at any stage throughout, pop a question in there and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can. If questions are quite specific, I'll give them to Derek and Derek can come back another time in regards to maybe setting up a meeting or something like that with the individual. So I'll just pop over to, we'll get things started. So I suppose at the moment, I was at an Enterprise Ireland event on Friday, Derek, in regards to full employment. It was all about lots of ministers talking about how good the labour market is at the moment in regards to the employment numbers, which is great from an economic perspective in terms of, an Irish perspective. It does pose a problem to companies in regards to recruitment because we're finding it, I think there isn't a sector hit at this stage that are finding it easy to recruit people. So, even I was talking to somebody recently in regards to they were asking us, were we getting an influx of, as a software company, were we getting an influx of applicants based on all the redundancies from the multinational companies? We're certainly not seeing that. I don't think any company is saying that they're getting an influx of candidates. So in terms of being in a country being in full employment, which is fantastic, companies who still need to recruit people, I suppose, how can we change our recruitment strategy, or what should companies be doing, in your opinion, to really attract candidates? And it has to start with recruitment, I presume.
Yeah, look, I think as you rightly say, there's so many positives to being where we're at, having, I suppose, as many people in employment, I think that the state maybe has ever seen, and being as close to full employment as we can get. So with those positivities and the goodness that all comes out of that, it has, as we know, in the last 12 months, created significant challenges. And I think for me, I kind of look through two lenses of the challenge. One is the organizational challenge, and the second being the HR lens and looking through that. So if I think about the organization challenge, again, economically, we're in a good position from a country. There's a lot of talk of growth. You talked about the EI event. So organizations are endeavoring to grow, which obviously is extremely difficult to do when there's a talent shortage. So I think the ability to grow as an organization and reach the organizational plans that are set out can be dampened or significantly challenged in the absence of having the right talent in place at the right time. And I think even I'd go even further to say we've seen, particularly certain industries, the ability even to service the current clients and customers that they have being challenged because of the talent shortage. So whether that's, I don't know if you've experienced yourself, getting someone to respond to an email or to return a phone call or sometimes answer a phone call or get something processed, and we've seen organizations even changing opening hours because of the staff shortages. So I think on an organizational level, it's definitely impacting. And so what does that mean to answer your question? I think, from a HR perspective, HR absolutely need to look through different lenses to try and take this challenge on. So, and I don't, in my experience, and obviously we get lucky enough to work with a lot of different companies throughout the year across all the different sectors. And like you say, I've heard no one use the word influx when it comes to candidates, certainly not. I think there's still a lot of organizations trying to backfill places or vacancies that they have, never mind kind of grow. So I think if we look through the HR lens, look, I think the starting point always has to be that the employee value proposition. It has to constantly be refined to make sure it's relevant to the demographics of the candidates that you're seeking to attract, and getting that message across appropriately. So I think a lot of organizations have worked on their EVP over the last while, but it isn't something I think personally is static. I think organizations should keep it under review to make sure it remains as relevant. I think understanding where the candidates are for the vacancies that you have, and making sure then you're able to tap into that pool of candidates. So just putting an advert out there just doesn't mean that you're going to attract everyone. People obviously aren't necessarily looking all the time. So being very specific and talking and answering those questions internally within HR to say, where are our candidate pool? The other thing, I suppose, and we've seen it with certain organizations, they've widened their candidate pool as well. You know, traditionally the 2-1 business graduate was the hire. And now they're saying, well, actually, that doesn't help us in terms of innovation, diversity, and many other things. So they've widened the candidate pool, which I think allows them then to, I suppose, fish in newer candidate waters to, I suppose, hopefully help them get more people in front of them. And I think sometimes that's been the challenge. Organizations aren't even getting to be in front of candidates enough to so show them and talk through the great vacancies that they have. The other point I would say around it is that we still see organizations' processes and systems getting in their way, the recruitment processes and systems that I suppose sometimes they're just not efficient enough or effective enough. So the timelines that it takes to get back to candidates, the lack of planning to have I suppose robust screening taking place, managers available for interview, all the things, the different stages within a process can slow down, obviously, the ability to actually bring someone in, and those candidates then end up, you know, getting a job offer elsewhere. So I think the process and system is something organizations need. Now, I think I'd always caveat that to say is the quality and the integrity should never be compromised when you're coming to hiring, but taking the opportunity to play devil's advocate with your process and say, well, you know, if we have a 4-stage process and it's taking us X amount of time to get someone, you know, have we lost candidates en route? Are candidates not willing to go through that, and why not? So I think it's absolutely the time to revisit that, because certainly the signs are, whilst there's a slowing of somewhat of the level of growth around the recruitment market this year, I don't think personally is going to ease up significantly the talent shortage and the challenge for businesses.
Yeah, and I think 2 important things you said there, Derek, is one in terms of that an EVP, if you've had the same value proposition for the last 5 years, it's time to look and update it. It's an ever-changing thing. I mean, I was at an event on Friday, Enterprise Ireland, and the talk was all about sustainability and the importance of that in terms from a recruitment perspective. So, you know, if that's something that's relevant to your company, you need to update your EVP, right? It's not something that you've written and you just leave it on the wall for the next 5 years, right?
Yeah, look, 100%. And yeah, look how fresh, you know, and I know HR will go, well, we don't own the website, and, you know, that's usually potentially the first portal.
Yes.
So I think all aspects of this need to get looked at. You know, the job descriptions that no one wants to touch because it's a job in itself to go and revise job descriptions. So, you know, how attractive are they? If you actually read the job description, like, is this something that you're willing to leave a job to go based on just reading that job description, or, as you said, looking at the EVP that the organization has online? The other thing as well, and I think it's an education piece for managers within organizations, is, and look, we're all guilty that, you know, if someone leaves the team, we want to replace that. If Mary was great, we want Mary back. We want a new Mary.
We want like for like.
Oh, like, we want Mary to sit in the same seat and do everything that the previous Mary did. We don't want the hassle. We want them fully trained. We want. But in a tight labour market, that's very difficult to do. You'd be paying more for a new Mary. But secondly, you know, and I remember having discussions with some of the recruiters around this as well, saying, well, why would someone leave a job to do the exact same thing elsewhere? Where's the growth? So are you hiring for someone? Obviously, you're always hiring for ability, but they've maybe got 60 to 70% of the skills necessary. So there's growth within the role. And that's a hard sell at times to managers when they just want Mary. They still have the loss. And they said, I don't have time to train someone up. you go, well, we don't have the ability potentially to replace like with like, or if we do, it could take 3-6 months, and we've lost a lot of time within there. So I think the influence of HR can potentially be stronger if they take the time to think through it.
Yeah, and the other thing you said there, in regards to the recruitment process, and maybe losing candidates because it's not optimized. I had a friend recently who was going through recruitment through job offers, and she said, you know, she got on a recruitment, so interview stage 1, 2, 3, an offer within 2 weeks. Somebody else came back to her, offered within 4 weeks. She'd already accepted the first offer. You know, people's recruitment processes on a tight labor market have to be optimal, right?
They do, and I think that's within the control of HR, because again, you're hiring for the business, you're hiring for the organization. So, you know, for managers not to make themselves available with these sort of turnaround times. So when someone resigns, the time, as we know, to start advertising isn't after the person has left the seat. You know, you're in early with the process. You're reviewing, does it need to be like with like? You're getting sign off on the salary ranges and everything else that's in there. So there's none of this, all that's front loaded very quickly. So there's no delays at the end if you do find the candidate that you want, and the risk of someone else, I suppose, stealing them from under you. And can I say, because I have to say this, there will be hundreds of HR people on the call, and like, the professionalism, I think that's needed. And we see it in a lot of organizations. They do very, very robust professional processes. But we have seen candidates, and including some HR candidates, when we talk to other organizations, where HR people have either not shown for interviews or have accepted a job and they're due to start in 2 weeks' time. So the company stopped hiring for that role because they have their candidate, and they go and they take another offer, and they literally give no notice to the hiring organization. So they're starting from scratch again. So I would encourage candidates to make sure that if they're engaging in a process, you're doing so with the intent of it, obviously, if that offer's there and it's the right role, taking it, rather than leaving organizations hanging, whereby you've got 2 or 3 offers and organizations are then going back to start all over again. You know, but it's just something I think in a tight labor market we could see it, still obviously employees or applicants are in a stronger position. But you know, as you mentioned, but the layoffs, not just in tech and manufacturing and some other industries, there's a little bit of softness coming to the market.
Yeah, I'd agree. So in terms of, you know, after, I'm not going to say this is a COVID issue, because I think it would have come to the fore anyway, is in terms of employee expectations, we have seen a change in the last few years in regards to employees expecting things, and that's not a remuneration side of things. It's expecting, whether they're expecting flexible working, or they're expecting, you know, some kind of long-term plan in regards to their career progression, or, you know, even what does the company actually stand for. So a lot of I suppose employees are now really focusing on, well, actually, what does this company stand for? Do I actually really want to work there? Do you feel, Derek, is that kind of employee expectation going to continue? Is that kind of the trend that you're seeing at the moment? I know you guys did the barometer check, you do it every year, but just in regards to, is that expectation continuing?
It's still my view. It's still very present, and I think there's a couple of aspects to this for me that I suppose people can have preferences and things that suit the type of job that they want, and the type of culture they want to work within. You know, do they want to work for an organization like Patagonia that obviously has very clear kind of what they stand for in terms of their principles and their values and all. And that I think that's always been present, but I do think that there was a paradigm shift arising coming out of the if we can say, coming, you know, in a post-COVID world, whereby post-COVID world overlapped with the tight labor market, whereby people finding things about their ways of working, their ways of working and all that never really settled as much. So I think expectations for me there's a win-win in expectations with employee expectations and employer expectations. The problem I would see and the challenge is that the employee expectations can't be met or managed sufficiently enough by businesses at the moment. And there's an element of compromise, and there's an element of, I suppose, leaving things as they are rather than what's necessarily right by the business. So, if we think of things about employee expectations and just in terms of work, we can think of things around the whole area of where, when, and how people want to work. And again, in principle, absolutely, they're the sort of questions and discussions that should be had, like, where do I need to work? Should I be working from home? Can I work hybrid? Can I work remote? All those are good discussions and positive discussions to be had. I link that though to, well, what are the business needs? So the role I have is at times I need to be somewhere. I need to be in a room with someone. I need to be standing on a stage somewhere. I need to be down the WRC. So where I am is aligned to what the business needs. Other times, complete flexibility that where I'm working. So I think the question is, when we look at where, employees and organizations absolutely should feel comfortable having a conversation around that. But we would like, and again, with my HR hat and lens on, for employees to say, well, actually, I can see there's great flexibility, hopefully, if the job doesn't require me to be full-time on site, etc., on the where. And I see what the business needs are. I mightn't agree with all of them. I mightn't agree that an anchor day is good and all the rest, but I can understand why, and there's common ground to be met. I think the when kind of coincides with that as well, that we're saying, like, sometimes the phones need to be answered from 9 a.m. because you're in the service industry, or that cover is required over lunch, or whatever it might be. So again, there's parameters around that to help to ensure the business needs are met, and usually the customer needs are met. So again, open discussion and finding the parameters that work for the organization and hopefully support the preferences of the employee. And then I think the how part, we kind of where, when, and the how part for me is there are processes, there are systems, there's protocols, there's legislation, there's things that, have to be done, quality checks, all those sort of things, that there isn't huge give or leeway usually within organizations for the right reasons. So how the work gets done isn't, I suppose, at the freedom of an employee. So I think, if they're all part of a conversation, I think that's a very useful conversation to have with an employee. And the common ground is employer needs being met, and a lot, hopefully, of the employee preferences being met as well. And that's where the common ground is.
And I think that's the key, right? It can't be employer dominated, it can't be employee dominated. It's got to be that it's a right fit for both. However, work still has to be done, productivity levels still have to be hit. We're in the companies aren't in the game of just I suppose bowing to everybody's way of working. But if we look at, I suppose, flexibility and performance, and this has been something that's been, it's been banged around for the last few years, just in regards to the not just remote working, but in terms of flexible working as well. So we have the hybrid model, or people maybe working different hours and things like that. What do you think does data tell us that people who have that flexible working, are they more productive? What's the role of HR really in focusing on the way we work and the metrics behind it?
Yeah,
$1 million question, Derek.
Yeah.
What way of working works for us?
That flexibility, like for me, again, it's up there as a no-brainer where it's possible to do. But again, you're asking the questions that if you're working on you're an operator and you're on a shift pattern, your start and finish
Different
time.
story.
So and I think certain things like that are accepted. But I've even shown some manufacturing organizations and how they've managed even to move some of their shift patterns around to improve flexibility, and that's where I suppose the real nuggets of learning and HR impacting things like that are. So again, I'd be of the view that the organization sets out what it needs, so the flexibility again, we want to give autonomy to staff. We want to trust staff that they're going to do their job. These are all really positive things. We want to support staff in terms of what they do. Again, all positive things. But again, as a manager, it's hard to do if you have one staff member starting work at 7 a.m. and another starting at, or still working at 8 p.m. and, never the two shall meet. So you're kind of thinking, well, what do I need as a manager? What does the organization need to be able to meet the requirements of the job and the team and the business whilst allowing for levels of flexibility? So again, I think there's my experience has seen, and even in our own business, there's plenty of scope for flexibility, but equally there's times when the client, the customer, the business is saying, well, actually, this Friday we all need to be somewhere for this particular meeting, and that's where the flexibility can't be afforded as it had been for the previous 3 Fridays. And that's not a negative thing. That's just, I think, real clarity on expectations management. But I think organizations should start with the view of flexibility is positive, certainly from employees' perspective. Does it improve productivity? I would like to see the paper around that. If there one ever does exist, I'm not sure they do, but I think it improves satisfaction of employees. I'd say it could improve engagement of employees, and arguably there's the link from engagement to performance, and then reach maybe the productivity. So I think there's a lot of positives to be gotten from it. I think the other side is, and maybe links back slightly to our earlier discussion, Chriselle, is there's been a lot of talk obviously around health and well-being of employees, particularly as under new ways of working. So people want the autonomy, the flexibility to do where they work, when they work. But equally, if we are listening to employees, they're saying, well, I feel it harder to disconnect. I feel I'm working longer hours. I feel not as connected to my colleagues, maybe not as connected to my manager. So some of those things there, you're kind of going, well, as an organization, we don't want those things. We don't want people feeling disconnected, not feeling as engaged, et cetera, et cetera. And some of those things that organizations do, such as we're having team sessions, even virtually together, it's always going to be at this time and this day, or anchor days within a month where we get together. It's to overcome some of those downsides that we've seen emerge and evolve. And there's an article I'll send on to yourself and Jenny afterwards, and you might want to share. It's a New York Times article, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, and the title thought, "What Young Workers Miss Without the Power of Proximity" is the title. So finally, some of the studies are coming out to say is, well, the organizations are trying to afford the flexibility around many things, but equally, it can't be at the expense of the employee being successful and the organization being successful.
Yeah. But I think as well, Derek, we've done a number of podcasts since COVID, over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And I've asked you the same question each time in regards to, and I think we've had the same answer in regards to companies don't wait for legislation in regards to flexible working, remote working, things like that. Figure out what way you as a company want to work, what's going to work for you. Do you want to be 100% remote? Are you happy to be hybrid? Yes, the flexible working policy has come in, but what way do you want to work as a company? Stop waiting, make the decision. And I suppose I wonder, why are companies finding it difficult to make the decision? Is it because of that labour market shortage that they're trying to attract people, or is it just that we're not sure what makes people productive?
Yeah, no, you're right. I know we've continued to have this discussion because it's still so relevant today. Obviously, since we've spoken last, or our last session together, the work-life balance legislation has been enacted. So over the last number of weeks, so that's been obviously a significant development. And the challenge with that is the code of practice for the right to request remote working is not yet developed. So we're still potentially a couple of months away from having the infrastructure from an organization's perspective to be able to make a decision aligned to the codes of practice and the legislation. But that being said, absolutely, I think the labour market has really impacted organizations taking a position on it. I know there was a lot of cajoling, a lot of suggestions of what people should be doing. So we encourage our employees to come in X amount of days per week and all the rest for those who are going hybrid type thing. And that did not work. Many organizations have spoken to that cajoling, suggesting and all just did not work. So then they moved into an element of light mandating of people to do. And even that didn't, get the same level of impact that organizations thought. And I think, yes, it's been unhelpful, the timing of the legislation kind of hanging over there, that an organization, if they roll out their policy, it might well have to be adapted or amended based on what the code of practice is. But will it need to be fundamentally changed? Maybe not, because we've a good insight into what's there already. So yeah. It's just the devil in the detail. But I agree. It goes back to the point as to what direction is the organization going in around it. If you're going fully remote, as you well know, that takes a type of culture, a type of environment, a model to do all that. And that's well possible to do. Not all organizations want to do that. And they can see the benefit of a hybrid, but they're still straddling the labour market shortage and challenge with the risk of high employee turnover, and they haven't yet fully grasped that nettle.
Yeah. And, I was talking to somebody last week in regards to, we're obviously a 100% remote company, and they're like, oh, that must be great after COVID or whatever. And I was trying to explain, it took a lot of hard work. Remote doesn't just mean that everybody's at home and we continue as normal. We have, our induction programs have to change because it's remote. Our employee engagement strategy has to change because we have to focus on, like you said, getting those anchor days in or making sure people are feeling engaged. So whatever strategy, whatever way of working you want to choose, there is a job of work from that HR, if you have that function, has to do to make sure it's going to work.
Yeah, I would have said it right in those early days about sleepwalking into a working arrangement that isn't right by the employer and sometimes isn't right by the employee as well. And I said that article about the impact on younger workers and particularly female workers as well is starting to show that what certainly I know I've been vocal about is like there's benefit. We're human creatures, we're social animals, and it doesn't mean that we need to be together 40 hours a week. Absolutely not. But there's certain things that individuals can benefit from by being in the same room at certain times. And equally, there's certain work. I know we were talking offline about when you need your own time, deep work, get stuff done that you don't need 10 people interrupting you to do. And that's where the balance is. But I still are seeing organizations with old working practices and models trying to layer on top of a more flexible and hybrid working arrangement, and there's a disconnect to them because they haven't provided that clarity on, well, are there certain things that need to be done in person or they're not? So what are the non-negotiables that an organization is saying are in the non-negotiables bucket here? And I think unless they're clear of that and they've clearly communicated that, how are employees meant to know? Is there an element of discretion that that's one of the meetings I don't have to go in for, or no, whatever else happens, that's the meeting that I know every month or every week, whatever it might be, that I need to be in there. And yes, I do need to travel. Look, if I could avoid being in the car, bus or train, that saves me time. But the benefits outweigh the journey. That there's the tangible benefits of meeting the colleagues you still haven't yet met, or spending time with the new people, or supporting them to become the new Marys that we lost in terms of employee turnover.
Yeah, so we have a question here, and I would encourage anybody as well, if they have any questions for Derek. I'll just ask this question for you, Derek. How can HR ensure that employees' expectations are being met whilst remote working?
Okay, so if we think about employee expectations while remote working, I suppose I'd be looking to certainly get the clarity on what those what they are, what the employee expectation, and it might be that, and it might be that if I'm remote working, I expect I've got flexibility as well. I have flexibility to drop and pick kids up. Okay, so I'll just use that example, or I have flexibility that I'm able to run a few errands during the day because I'm going to be working a little bit later. And again, in principle, if business needs are being met, there's no issue with that, as long as there's transparency within that. And it's not employees going, I can never tell my employer this is what I'm doing between 9 and 9:15 because it's expecting me on my desk and I'm just doing a quick kids drop off. So I think that's where the lose-lose part of it is. So if the employee has expectations or requests, that's where they talk to the manager to see can they be met, and is it an organizational policy, that is being rolled out, or we've seen a lot more kind of devolving down to line managers to say, well, look, it's your team. If that doesn't impact your outputs and outcomes as a business, as a department, and it's worked within the wider general parameters, go ahead and do it. And that's kind of HR saying, we're not going to tell you, manager, that those 15 minutes are business critical if you're telling us they're not. I think other expectations around availability, and that obviously we saw probably 2 years now, the right to disconnect code of practice get rolled out. So I think that as an expectation, it should always be there anyway, because, you know, even prior to remote working, people were on their devices anyway and could check their emails. So I think it's just reinforcing what that is. And I think for me, the final part for that, well, the final part I bring up is about that it's a two-way thing. Like, arguably sometimes out of sight is out of mind, and not a good thing. That, you know, I'm not talking to Christelle, I assume everything's going great, but if I did get on a call with her and I could read body language, I'm thinking, actually, you know, something appears to be wrong. So employees should drive some of that as well. So setting the expectations that it's a two-way street, that I will be checking in on you. Of course I will, you know, touch base. And that's not a big brother check-in. That's the tap you on the shoulder, how you getting on. I would do so if we were in close proximity anyway. But equally, I would want you coming to me if you're having a bad day, week, month, you know, come to me and let me know, because I can't always read the room on a small screen for 20 minutes every second day. So I wouldn't be afraid to ask for expectations, but again, I would position it in the context. We want to understand what they are. We want to see what ones can potentially be met, what ones mightn't be aligned to us now, may in the future mightn't be aligned to us now. And then this is going to be going back into, well, what does the culture of the organization become?
Yeah, and actually, I love that. Derek, I'd be a huge advocate of that, is that it is a two-way street. You know, in terms of expectations, I think the first expectation is that we expect if you're having any problem, you're coming and telling us what the problem is. Because exactly like you said, it's that tap your shoulder. We're missing out on the water cooler time. How's everything going? I think I've used this example 20 times already. So apologies if anybody has heard this on another webinar or pod, is that you know, I'd have a check-in with somebody and they're super duper flustered, and he was like, I just need another screen. It's like, why'd you tell me that 2 months ago? I would have got you another screen. It's no big deal. And if I was in the office, I'd have been like, why is your screen broken?
I know. And then I was talking to someone there a while back, and they said they joined a new organization, and they said the first 2 weeks, like, I think a lot of organizations maybe don't sometimes do induction well in general, but they said because of obviously it was remote and the practices really hadn't, you know, gone into this remote world for probation for that particular company, the first 2 weeks they were just sitting in front of a screen with really nothing to do and no one to ask, and there was no, you know, no buddy system, all the things that you have to work hard with even in an in-person environment. At times you have to work harder in a remote environment. So back to the question, like, yes, if you asked an employee after the first day, you know, particularly if someone was joining, you know, how did you get on? Is there things on second day, end of the first week? It's a constant check-in, but you can do that, I suppose, in a positive way with your existing team, and have that open discussion going, I'm not out to Big Brother and check in and are you there or are you not? But I am checking in to make sure you're okay and to make sure things are going well. But equally, as you rightly say, expectation management, it's a two-way street.
Yeah, and I think it's important at the outset to talk about those expectations. You know, even you were talking about in terms of collecting kids, you know, and I would say this to my own managers, is that no problem if people have to hop out to collect kids, you know, or drop offs or whatever it is, that's no problem. However, my expectation is if I have scheduled a meeting, that they're there at 3 o'clock. You know, so, and yes, I am. So we have no problem with people doing it, but that expectation, it's important that that's communicated to people, saying that's okay unless there's a company need, right?
Yeah, and again, there's nothing unreasonable about that. Now, I know people say, well, you know, if it's 3 o'clock every day, if it was possibly 3:15 meetings, you go, look, that might be possible. But if it doesn't lend to your diary, then you're kind of going, well, look, as a manager, COO, I'm kind of going, well, actually, this is the time I have available. So you're not being unrealistic around or unreasonable. And I think the other part is if people are saying, well, look, actually, something's come up. I know it's a bit unusual. I need to drop out for an hour or two during the day. Look, but then my expectation, now let's say this publicly, but is that people make up that time. You know, if they're doing something to go, look, it just happens, I need to do this during the day, I need to collect something, that office closes at 5 o'clock, whatever it might be, and yeah, there's nothing going to impact the client's grant, but just catch up and do that hour later on, or start early tomorrow morning. But don't, it's a give and take thing for me. That's always been, I suppose, how I've sought to approach it. That you know,
but I think I don't know, Derek, we agree is that sometimes we presume that people understand that expectation. And you know, so you're saying, and I would be 100% the same as you in regards to, I would presume that people understood that my expectation was not that they work back the hour, you know, not that I'm expecting them to clock in and out, but if they're having to go to a quick meeting for a quick appointment or whatever for 2 hours, I'm expecting that their job isn't being affected by it.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because you're not saying, well, you know, you're taking that off. I want you to take annual leave instead of it. You're being flexible. But this is back to the two-way street around flexibility. Equally, there's times when, you know, stuff happens in business and with clients that you're kind of going, it's shoulder to the wheel. And I need you to, you know, no one expected this was going to come in on a Wednesday and it's I don't know, big tender, and we need to get a lot of stuff in by Friday. It's a great opportunity. So yeah, we're going to have to work late or whatever, you know, and within, again, it's used a lot in employee relations terms as reasonable, and obviously it can't be defined what it is, but I think most people in the main 80-20 rule would kind of agree what is reasonable and what is unreasonable on behalf of employees and employers.
Yeah, I'd agree. So we're going into the I suppose the real specific questions, strategy. I told you I spent a week last week all talking about strategy. So we're strategic planning in HR. I'm hoping people have lots of questions for you, Derek, in regards to how to actually do strategy. So strategic planning in HR. I often think it is, and I hope nobody on the call does this, I often think that it is something that is forgotten in HR, that as a HR department, it is really important that you have a strategy, and that it has to obviously be aligned to business, the business strategy as well. You know, I won't lecture everybody. I'm sure you can forward somewhere where I've lectured people on this before, is that if HR want to get a seat at the table, they've got to be aligned with the business, and they need to make sure that the HR strategy is measurable. That's my lecture done. Derek, over to you. So how do you create capacity, I suppose, capability within HR to really be able to focus on that strategic planning?
Yeah, no, very great. You could have even the best strategic plan aligned to those the business needs, but you haven't delivered it. So it's not something that's going to get you credibility in the future. So I think you've touched on two words there, but the capacity and capability within HR are, I think, very relevant topics to look at. So within any HR department, and I think for me, if we take them kind of separately, but they're aligned, that capacity, you talk to most people, are you busy? The answer is it's always in the positive. Of course, I'm really busy, you know, and you're saying, but are you full busy or good busy? And no, I think if we're good busy, that's great in business terms. You know, we're doing the things that we should be doing and hopefully having the impact we should be having. How do we do that? Well, we sometimes have to create capacity. And for me, in HR terms, and I've obviously managed HR teams and been in-house as well, is removing or minimizing the non-value add activities. HR is just administratively heavy. Recruitment, it's just administratively heavy. But there's plenty of tools, and I say this even if I wasn't on a HRLocker webinar, that really do make a big impact. And for organizations, even small organizations, not to have something in place, and then particularly when I see medium organizations with not having a system in place, I just think they're really they're paying HR administrators to be highly paid administrators in a way.
Yeah.
And they're not paying HR administrators to be adding value at a HR level. So creating capacity through better processes and using the right systems is, and look, I'll stand challenged on this any day of the week. I don't see the value add in administering annual leave centrally from HR when it can be done on a system and by managers. I don't see the need to be able to have to keep updating spreadsheets and versions of spreadsheets and hard copies of things, when in a digital world all this can be automated and can be retained very effectively by HR departments and easily referenceable. And even to the point recently was in with an organization, and they had changes at their senior team and even within HR. And what it had left is a gap of, I suppose, ability to say, are they fully compliant and where's all the information relating to all the employees? And it was here, there and everywhere, as opposed to sitting on a HRIS and that is doing the work as more than a database, but it's enabling them to manage probations, performance management, learning and development. So create capacity by investing time in streamlining a process and putting the right system in place. I think when you create that capacity, you're able to focus on capability. The HR administrator isn't now 35 hours of a 40-hour week, sending out letters and emails and the rest. They've freed themselves up 15 hours of that week to be able to focus on something that's higher value. Those higher value activities usually are contained within that HR operational plan, which obviously has cascaded down from your HR strategic plan. So I think create the capacity, build the capability that lends to then, I suppose, the value-added activities within the strategic plan that hopefully HR, as you rightly say, have put in place. I think the other part of that is assuming, and probably wrongly at times, that HR haven't developed a strategy in isolation of the organization. So they're hearing the buzzwords. They're hearing EVP, talent acquisition, total reward, like many other great things that are very relevant, but the business is over here going, well, we're somewhere else. What's most important to us are these 3 or 5 things that our shareholders want or the business owners want in the next 2 years. So don't come in with something, I suppose, I'm going to use the word flowery is the wrong word, but something that's aesthetically beautiful, but it isn't hard and meeting the actual needs of the business.
Yeah, and I'd agree with that. If even we spoke briefly about putting sustainability there. I mean, if your EVP is saying that you put sustainability at the center of everything that you do, and then the person comes to work for you and actually it's not on the agenda, it may sound fantastic. However, the expectation from the beginning is aligned. Yeah. So I suppose, how do you create that environment, Derek, do you think, to really focus on moving away that HR is, yes, the admin has got to be done and we can't move away from that, but just to really focus on that, it's an environment kind of, I don't use the word, but in terms of HR excellence, that it's just focused on that, you're really just excelling, that HR team is pushing.
Yeah, and I think if you use the HR kind of excellence, HR service excellence, what springs to mind to me is at times organizations focusing on that externally first rather than internally. So for me, and we touch upon the two briefly, but internally is where you establish your credibility. That, if payroll sits and within HR and, obviously issuing of contracts and probation management, performance management, all the things that need to be done, efficient talent acquisition, that you get credibility by internally having excellence. And so you set your own internal standards, your own service level agreements, even within the team, that you're saying, well, we're servicing, we're supporting the business. We need to get all these things right and get that level of credibility and layer on top of that the other initiatives then that organizations are doing. Because I think it's a false economy to say, like, we're looking at these fantastic initiatives across the organization when people are going, yeah, but my pay has been wrong for the last 2 months, and I still haven't got the letter confirming my probation has been confirmed. Things that can effectively and efficiently be done in an internal HR service excellence focus. And even to the point, I'd be saying that should be in your strategic plan. One of your pillars is about that focus and having that measured internally, and being able to say to your CEO and your C-suite, we measure this, and we're going to put our efforts in to make sure we're providing the right level of support internally to meet the needs of the business. The other part of that then is that service excellence that I think people sometimes just jump on is the external, to say, well, look, we get this award and we apply for that. And don't get me wrong, some of them are fantastic and the rest, but, I would always want it in the context of it being true to who we are. So if you get this fantastic award for D&I, but everyone knows as a culture, there's nothing inclusive about it, I think you're really sending the wrong messages internally, and the credibility of HR is negatively impacted if you're kind of saying, well, this is what we sell to the outside world, but once the doors are closed, something internally is completely different. But I think certainly having HR service excellence as a pillar of one of your HR plans absolutely is needed, and even to the point where making sure that as a HR department or team, you're looking down the horizon, looking up at the horizon, what's coming down the line that we need to start thinking about as well. That gives us even more credibility in the business to say, we need to start making sure we're thinking about, obviously, gender pay gap reporting for organizations, pre-last year of the size. We've things like pay transparency coming in as well. That's going to impact that's not a HR thing. That's an organization thing about pay transparency. So they're the things to say, well, being able to have credibility and delivery of normal day-to-day tasks and doing that effectively, and informing and supporting the business in other areas that it needs.
And I love that, Derek, in terms of informing the business, because again, I won't lecture in regards to, HR shouldn't just be a support function. It should be focused on, exactly like you said, that pay transparency is coming down the line. That's going to affect, it's a company. It's going to affect the company,
And it goes into, well, two things for me, like they have to advertise their pay ranges. Not all organizations do that at the moment. And then they can get requests from employees about pay ranges at their grade. So that causes work and that causes busyness. And hence we're back into that cycle of being too busy on the capacity side to focus on the capability. Now, on a shameless side, I can say, obviously, from a Linea perspective, this is the stuff we share out with our people. We're telling this is coming down the line. This is the potential impact. This is what you need to start planning for. And then as it has a work-life balance, then there's multiple aspects of that. There's the policy, there's the considerations, and get it rolled out. And I think, again, back to the credibility of HR, that there's been a lot of legislation pushed through pretty quickly, and some that has been taken forever, like the sick leave the sick pay to come through. But a lot has happened from a legislative perspective, and from talking with organizations, and a number who joined Linea on the basis of actually getting caught out on not having informed the organization around the transparent and predictable working conditions and the changes that had on probations, because they were too busy day to day, and I can understand that, very busy doing what they need to do, that their head wasn't up enough to see what else was coming in. And then when it happened, they hadn't been informing the organization in good time or sufficient time to be able to plan for it. So that's where I think we're going to go back to, well, if it's identified within the strategic plan, then not only do we need to have that internal service excellence, we need to be that informer, advisor, confidant to the business around things that are going to impact business-wise, not just HR-wise.
Yeah, and I think that's important. Exactly like what we said earlier in regards, we've had the discussion 100 times in terms of, companies should be focused on what's coming down the line. You need to be aware of what the HR legislations that are coming down the line. We use Linea ourselves just in regards to making sure we know, like the sick pay, it does have an effect on the bottom line in terms of how much it's going to cost. Do we actually have a sick? And even just to inform, Derek, I think in terms of the sick pay policy changing to say, guys, this is coming down the line. It's actually less than what we currently pay. We're actually paid, I don't know, 10 days, sick days, whatever it is, so, yes, we're aware the policy is coming down. It's not actually going to have any effect on the company, but we know it's coming down. Or alternatively, the pay transparency, gender pay gap, not an issue. We actually don't have to be doing it, but we are actively focused on it.
And preparing that when it does hit them, 150 or 50 employees, that this isn't coming out of the blue. And I think that goes back to having the headspace within HR. And I know we did, and I probably mentioned it last time, we did a strategic plan for an organization, and gender pay gap, they had 400 plus staff, and gender pay gap wasn't on their radar. And you say, but it is coming in. And in fact, obviously it came in there last year. And if it hadn't been for the challenge to them to think about it, it wasn't in their plan. And their credibility then internally to say, well, why weren't we planning for this? What is a significant body of work that can have significant impact on our EVP, on discussions at board level, at how we manage our talent pipeline, all those sort of things are business impacts, not necessarily HR impacts.
Yeah, but I love what you said earlier, just that, but HR should be that informer. Yeah, they should be that. I have 2 questions here for you, Derek, while you're in the hot seat there. I have an employee that isn't as productive in the morning, but is online past our standard working hours. I have no problem with this, as they always get their work done, but they sometimes miss the team meetings. How do you think I should address this?
Yeah, I think it's and there is that thing about, is it the night owls and the morning larks, is it, or whatever, and look, I'm a morning person. I love getting stuff done in the morning, and equally, and some of my colleagues who who you are, work better later, and they can't understand me, my earliness. So it is a thing. I think the questions will be like, if the team meeting, we're going back to where it's a non-negotiable, then you can't. Like, if it's a non-negotiable, then because I doubt it's a team meeting every morning. It might be a quick gathering, I don't know, but if it's a non-negotiable, then I don't think there's leeway in something like that. It's not being unreasonable. If it is something to say, well, look, we have it at 10. In fact, if we had it at 11 or whatever time, it makes no difference. In general, is there flexibility around doing it? I think the kind of the wider question as we continue on around it is, well, if the person is getting their job done, brilliant. Look, that, let's not lose sight of something here. They just prefer to work slightly differently, and just having that conversation to say, we're all supportive of that, night owl stuff, all the rest, but you just can't, you can't allow that to slip, because why would you allow one person not to attend the team meeting, and then if someone else doesn't attend? So I think there's a fairness in there to be gotten, but not addressing it is not the right way to go about it.
It's going to set a precedent. So I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to take one more question, which I could have written myself. is I love this question. It sounds like the relationship between a CEO and a HR leader has a bearing on how the rest of the organization perceives the department. How important is it that HR reports directly to the CEO versus reports to legal or reports to finance?
Yeah, well, look, obviously I arguably could be biased in this, given I'm 25 years in HR, but I'm of the view that HR is the right hand person, the right hand man, woman there, on the basis of that. And I even flip it around. What we've seen happen is that decisions are made by an organization, and then HR get told about them. So we're going to be downsizing. It's a financial decision, okay, and then HR are told what to do. And the missed opportunity to inform that decision-making process hasn't happened. You haven't even been in the room about it, because it's a financial decision. So the CFO was in, the CEO, maybe the COO was in, and HR gets told after the fact. So and if your culture is one that we're saying, well, we always want to be supportive of people, etc., 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 you're thinking, well, we need someone in the room that is asking the questions, not necessarily changing the direction of what may need to happen, but they're informing the discussion about, have we thought about this? Is there other options? Questioning, and supporting the process. I think what I've seen in the absence, where we've seen HR people reporting into finance people, I think that a lot of time is a bit of oil and water, whereby it's their budget arguments, and you've got the analytical blue character of a CFO, and sometimes the more sunshine yellow of a HR person at times. that doesn't necessarily, they have to work on their communication, but sometimes their aims are different. You know, the CFO's trying to manage the budget and keep, you know, compliance, whereas HR maybe need to become a little bit more risk adverse. And that's not helpful if you're reporting into the head of compliance, head of legal, you know, sometimes head of finance. So look, I think having access, being involved in those discussions, whatever they are, is necessary. But again, I'm going to push this back to the HR people on the call. Improving your business acumen, understanding the business, understanding the sector, understanding the macro challenges that are happening. Don't expect to be sitting around the table of people who are talking numbers and industry changes if all you're doing is talking HR. You don't deserve, you're not going to get a seat at the table that way. You're having to understand to say, well, look, if the economy's going this direction, technology's going this direction, industry's going that direction, yes, I'm bringing to, well, this is what's happened in the talent market and legislation, all the rest, but that's the holistic approach. Don't just bring one thing to the table, which is, I understand HR. You're not going to be staying at the table for very long.
Yeah, and somebody said to me before, is that sometimes HR is the only person at the boardroom who doesn't come with numbers. And if you want to stay at the boardroom, you better start coming with numbers. You know,
and I heard that even expanded out to say, and then HR came with a PowerPoint with numbers in it. Just bring the Excel document. Everyone else has got Excel, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
And the joke was like, it doesn't need to look that good. Just like hard. Or I go back to budget, hard hitting metrics, facts, figures, and you're underpinning the values under it. Of course you are, you know, or around it. But a number is a number at the end of the day. Sometimes that has to be met.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Derek. I really appreciate you coming on. It's always good to chat, and yeah. I feel after these, I'm like, we could just chat for another hour. Derek, I've asked you this many times: is what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, look, obviously LinkedIn probably the easiest. I would say look for HR people. You know, obviously my role now is to oversee our Linea offering, which is our online resource for HR practitioners. And it just, again, we talk about efficiencies and effectiveness. We do all the heavy lifting about understanding the legislation, the policies, benchmarking, pay. All that information is available to our Linea members. So just linea.ie, and people then, even just to get a demo of the platform, it again, back to capacity and capability, it's ticking two big boxes for HR practitioners.
And I think powerful, keeping you have to keep your finger on the pulse, understand what's coming down the line.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, everybody.
As always, pleasure, Christelle. Thanks for everything.
Yes. Thank you, Derek.
Take care. Thanks,
everybody.